Our objective in tutorial number 19 is to make the displays on the scoreboard behave the way they would in the real world. If you look at them at the moment, we have our zeros on the left hand side of the display, and as the scores increase, the digits move from left to right. This is the direct opposite, of course, of what happens in the real world, and that's what we're going to simulate here. So we're going to place our zeros on the right hand side, and as the numbers grow, they're going to work from the right to the left. That's our objective for this tutorial. I think the best place to start is probably going to be with the slither number here. We need to move its position from 584.186 on the x-axis there to a value of 626. And as soon as we do it, we get our zero leaping across there to where that is there, which is fine. Similarly, we need to do the same thing with our scores for the snakes. So if we take Sid's score, Nancy, Bonnie, Clyde and Dave, and we then move them to a value of 617 centimetres, we get the same result. So we've got our starting positions for our slither number counter and our scores. Now they're grouped into a null, and the null is positioned over here, so this is technically the zero position. Okay, the same applies to the score or slither number keeper, I should say. They're both in positions so that they're more or less level with the edges of the displays here. That's the zero positions. So what we now need to do is work on our Expresso to make sure that we can move this figure across as the numbers actually increase in size. So if we open up our expression on the null here, as I said, we're going to work with the slither number first because this is the simpler of the two. So all we need to do, we just need three nodes for this actually. So we need a logic compare, a logic condition, and finally we'll just need slither number. We need slither number as in the extrude here. That's what needs to be brought in. We'll bring that in, just move this over a little bit, bring it down here, maximize the size so we can see what we're doing, and we say position X. So we've got those set up in there. We're going to take the output from the count on the monoflop there into the input one of the compare, and we're going to compare to being less than 10. So until we reach the end of our final slither, we can switch our condition to use input 3. Now in input 3 we're going to put 40 in there in order to initialize our display. So that takes care of input 3, and then moving on from here we're going to leave 0 at input 2. So all the time we're less than 10 slithers, we're going to be placing our text 40 centimeters away from the 0 position. So this 0 at the moment is 40 centimeters away from this position here with the null. As soon as we get above 10, we're going to allow it to come back to the 0. So effectively, if this was still 0 and we got to 10, that 0 would jump across to where it was originally before we moved it. Of course, that won't happen because it will be 10. So we'll get a 1 in here and the 0 will still be in this position. So that's what's going to happen. All we then need to do is plug our condition into our position X. And as and when the time comes, that will look after itself. So that's that first little bit done. Continuing on from here, we now need to worry about the scores for the various snakes. And we'll start with Sid, and then I'll copy and paste as I always do with a bit of a pause in between. So we'll get started. What I need to do, I need to first create 3 compares. Place them under here. I've got my 3 compares, and the condition here, this is outputting the score tally to the scorekeeper. So this is where the score is actually coming from. So it's obviously that number that we need to be interested in when working with our digit to see where it needs to be positioned relative to its current value. If we plumb our 3 compares in there, in our first compare we're going to say greater than or equal to 100. In the second, greater than or equal to 10. And in the third, less than 100. I beg your pardon, I'm putting less than in there, less than 100. Okay, lost the plot there a minute. Okay, so we've got those 3 worked out. We know what we're going to do in there. Following on from here, I'm just going to move over a little bit, give myself a bit more room. I need a bool, bring in one of those, and this is going to be an AND, so I don't need to change its function. So I'll plug these 2 into that one. Following on from this, I need 2 conditions. First and second. Let's just move that one further over. The output from my first compare will switch my first condition. The output from my bool will switch my second condition. And the output from my second condition needs to be plugged into input number 2 of my first condition. So that's the setup for it. In the conditions, I just need to leave input 3 as a 0 in this particular one. In the other one, I need 80 in the first, or input in input 2, and 40 in input number 3. So what exactly is going on here? I can just about see SID's score. When it's in its initial position, SID's score is going to be less than 100, and it will also be less than 10. So it won't be between 10 and 100, which means we're going to get a 0 or false result at the output here. That being the case, the condition is going to be switched to input number 2, which has 80 placed in it. So 80 is the position where we start, because our null for it is at 0. We're 80 centimeters away from 0 at this point. That's our first condition set there. Now our first compare at the top here is saying greater than 100. Well, if we're greater than 100, we're going to be using the 0 position. Obviously, initially the score is 0, so we're not greater than 100. We've said that we've got a false output from here, so we're forced to use 80. That will be passed through the condition, forcing our 0 to its initial position on the right-hand side of the display. Once this condition has been satisfied, it's a case of greater than 10 or greater than or equal to 10, but less than 100. So when that's satisfied, we're going to switch to our condition's second input. So we're going to be using input 3, which is 40. Now, our first compare is saying greater than or equal to 100. Well, that's going to still be false. That's still going to be a false output there. So that won't be switched to our input number 3. So therefore, 40 is what's going to be passed here once we get to a score of, between 10 and 100. Our 0 is going to move one space over, or 40 centimeters over, which is effectively 1 digit's worth over, and we're going to get all of our scores between 10 and 100 positioned correctly. Once we have got it satisfied, so that this compare says if we're greater than or equal to 100, once that condition's been satisfied, these will be taken out of the equation, because of course we're going to be switched to input number 3, and therefore we're going to be at the 0 position. So once we get to 100, we're going to have a 1 in here, 0, 0, as we would expect to see on a real digital display. That's how that's going to work. Moving on, we now need to bring in SID's extrude here. So we'll grab the extrude, and I'm going to rename that a little bit later, but I'll keep it the way it is for now. Going to here, we want coordinates position X. We'll make it a little bigger so that we can see. And that's all there is to it. That will now work fine. If we just have a quick go at it, we're not going to see it all the way through because of course we've only got 2 slithers allowed at the moment, but let's see what we can get. And they're off. Well, it's correct. I mean, obviously the other scores at the moment are doing the wrong thing because they've not been set up, but you can see that Sid's score, which we've just done, is working perfectly. That's absolutely fine. And they're off. We'll do another race because we need to set the scores back to 0 afterwards. Okay, so we've got that set up thus far, and now we can go back to 0. At this point, I'll pause the recording, get the other scores set up with the other snakes, and then I'll come back and we'll have another look at it and see what we've got. I'll see you soon. And welcome back once again. So I now have everything copied and plumbed in as necessary for the various snakes. I've also changed the names of the extrudes to S score for Sid, N score for Nancy, etc. for the remaining snakes, just to make things clearer when we're working with them in here. So that's all worked out and done. Probably the best thing to do now, while we think about it, is to work with our compare here for a start. Change that from greater than or equal to 2 to greater than or equal to 10 so that we can get it to work with the correct number of slithers again. Similarly, we'll go into our expression here and set the value of this compare to equal to 10. Get that sorted out, and then we can forget this constant now and plumb the scores into their respective inputs here. Just get that done because we've completed our testing now. Just plug that in there. And that's fine. So everything now is basically plumbed in as it needs to be. We'll run a quick test. What I'll do the first 2 or 3 races and then I'll pause it again, play through to the last race, and then we'll check to make sure that the slither display actually works properly. Okay, so we'll do that now. Let's just start playing. And they're off. And they're off. And we're back at the beginning of the last race. And they're off. And you can see it works fine. So everything is working perfectly well at this point in the proceedings. That pretty much completes this tutorial. I'll see you soon in it's number 20 now, isn't it? My goodness, number 20. Okay, so I'll see you in number 20 when we'll just look at possibly putting what we've got here into a proper environment with start and finish posts and a canyon with a sky and various other bits and pieces. We'll just have a quick look at doing that. And then in our final tutorial of this series, we'll move on to looking at how we might optimize our expressions in order to make them run at their most efficient. That's what we've got planned, and I'll see you in tutorial 20 very soon.